Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will now undertake to provide the response to the 2025 budget. Mr. Speaker, the response is titled 2025 Budget Response, 5 years of missed opportunities. It's being handed out for all honourable leaders of the House to make reference to a particular table, Table 1. Mr. Speaker, the 2025 budget, as we all know, is a forecast of the future expenditures and projected revenues that the government anticipates. As the money plan for the country, it shows how the government intends to translate policy into tangible outcomes that benefit the people of Papua New Guinea. On that definition, Mr. Speaker, it stands as an important accountability measure for all members of Parliament. As legislators that pass the Appropriations Act every time a budget is brought into Parliament, all members of Parliament need to critically review the budget in terms of how the government actually spent monies in the previous budget and scrutinise the overall effectiveness of budget implementation based on the previous budget results. So before we start to buy into all the hyperbole of the 2025 budget, members of Parliament have to seriously ask the question, how was the 2024 budget implemented? Although the 2025 budget touts securing PNG in 2025 and beyond, the failures and shortcomings of the 2024 budget leaves much to be desired. And it throws a cloud over the 2025 budget and the likelihood of its success. Once again, we have to compare actual budget spending in the previous budget to the 2025 budget figures. Mr. Speaker, the 2025 budget response will focus on things that matter to the people of Papua New Guinea: the high cost of living, the low household incomes, the reduced purchasing power of our kina, the increased youth population, the lack of medicine and the poor health care throughout all districts and provinces, the high attrition rates in our education system, and the unsafe communities because of a prolonged law and order crisis that is affecting every citizen in the country. The critical question, once again, Mr. Speaker, is, will the 2025 budget have an indelible impact on the wide range of serious issues affecting the country? This budget response scrutinises the Marape government's fiscal policy and application of its fundamental instruments, taxes, spending and borrowing, to produce measurable results in terms of employment, price stability, savings and investment, and the balance of payments. It is incumbent on all members of Parliament to review the 2024 budget performance and assess the likelihood of the success of the 2025 budget. Honourable members of Parliament, history is the best teacher. Can all ministers confirm that they received 100% allocation in the 2024 budget? Can all members of Parliament confirm that they received the 20 million kina appropriation in the 2024 budget? The answer is a resounding no. Can every member of Parliament confirm that things are better in all social services in their districts, health, education and law and order? No, we can't. All this paints a telling picture, Mr. Speaker, that there is a serious mismatch in revenue and spending. The 2024 budget has failed. Parliament did not get an opportunity to correct the constraints of effective budget implementation because the 2024 MAIFO, as per the Fiscal Responsibilities Act, was not presented in July 2024 by the good Treasurer, but submitted 5 months later, quite tardy, in November 2025. Shame on you, Mr. Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, the lack of accountability in budget performance by the Treasurer reflects a lowering of standards that cannot be tolerated because national budgets deal with public monies, Mr. Speaker. Now I bring all honourable members of the House to Table 1, key indicators from 2018 to 2025, which is derived from the Treasury Department. Table 1 will be referenced throughout my speech, but we take note of the following data that was omitted from the 2025 budget. 1. Total arrears and multi-year contracts under the Connect PNG program, omitted. Details of sovereign guarantees, non-contingent liabilities and SOE loans, omitted. Data on GDP per capita, omitted. Employment data in real numbers, omitted. This seriously questions the accuracy of the big pronouncements that the good Treasurer has made in his 2025 budget speech, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will come to the first point, inflation. Inflation is basically, Mr. Speaker, when we have a situation of too much money for too few goods. It is an evil, Mr. Speaker, that affects our people in Papua New Guinea. This is the tax that our people pay because of the government's overspending, lack of fiscal discipline, and poor economic management. From Table 1, the 2024 headline inflation rate was 1.2%, and the 2025 inflation rate was expected to increase to 4.5%. The underlying inflation rate in 2024, however, Mr. Speaker, was 4.4%, considering energy and food products that add to price volatility. Once again, reminding us that we are an import-dependent country. In 2024, the low headline inflation, Mr. Speaker, of 1.2% came about because of the crawl-peg depreciation strategy imposed by the IMF and backed by the good Treasurer to cut imports and move towards an artificial trade surplus. High commodity prices on the world market increased revenues rather than increase production volume through direct funding interventions in the primary industry. In short, Mr. Speaker, the government got lucky with increased revenues from high commodity crop prices because of the world market. Mr. Speaker, the tripling of headline inflation in 2025 means that the rate of cost increase is expected to increase over 3 times in 2025. Combined with the Cantillon effect and exacerbated by our tough geography and the remoteness of many PNG communities, this will prolong the cost of living crisis for our people. In short, Mr. Speaker, the prices of goods and services will remain high the further away one goes from urban centres, because this government has failed to spur economic activity in all the rural centres. The SME policy has absolutely failed the people of Papua New Guinea. The 4.5% inflation, Mr. Speaker, in 2025 will have a knock-on effect to investments, savings, loans, pensions, insurance, consumer spending, employment rates, government programs, tax policies, and interest rates. In short, Mr. Speaker, inflation will have a pervasive impact on the whole economy and affect the people of Papua New Guinea. Now, we understand that there is no silver bullet when dealing with inflation, but it requires an acute understanding of how things work. And from this unmitigated rise and fall in inflation and the lack of the Treasury's ability to effectively show fiscal discipline, we expect that inflationary pressures will continue and continue to exacerbate the cost of living crisis in 2025. Of particular concern, Mr. Speaker, is the nexus between inflation rates and the exchange rate depreciation. This is in the budget estimates presentation, and I quote, "Underlying inflation was high at 4.4% in the third quarter of 2024, 3.1 percentage points higher than the third quarter 2023, reflecting exchange rate depreciation of the United States dollar and the Australian dollar. This is the effect that the IMF's crawl-peg depreciation is having on inflation. Treasury, in short, Mr. Speaker, has lost control of inflation and currency depreciation in the country. In 2025, inflation will triple, and the exchange rate will continue its downward spiral, meaning that the government will have to pay at least 7% to raise money for the budget. In addition, the public are also facing not just higher costs of inflation, but a higher interest rate in the Kina facility rate going up to 4% from 3.1%. This will make borrowing and investments more difficult. Papua New Guinea, Mr. Speaker, remains vulnerable to external shocks and global market forces, and the protracted cost of living crisis for our people, especially in the rural communities where the bulk of our people live, will continue. A key example, Mr. Speaker, is to bring all members of Parliament to consider, with empathy, the plight of our people. Let's consider an average Papua New Guinean, Mr. Speaker, that's earning 500 kina a fortnight. This person buys a bag of rice. Thanks to inflation and the mismanagement of the economy by the treasurer, a 10-kilo bag of rice now costs 100 kina. If you buy tin fish and other basic household items that cost another 200 kina, this individual, Mr. Speaker, is left with 200 kina for rent, transport, other meals, and sundry expenses, including diapers. This creates a vicious cycle for our people who are enslaved by loan sharks, charging them 50% or 100% interest on loans on the black market. This is the reality of Papua New Guineans that we all know and can relate to. Trying to feed a family, Mr. Speaker, on 500 kina per fortnight, under these cost of living pressures, trying to pay for school fees and meet social obligations, as is the custom in PNG culture, is not achievable for the bulk of our population. This is a sad indictment on the Marape government's economic management. Third, the Bank of Papua New Guinea, our central bank. Mr. Speaker, we have lamented about the encroachment of the Treasury Department on our central bank in the whole of 2024. Treasury's encroachment of the Bank of Papua New Guinea is counterproductive and it is illegal, Mr. Speaker. Now, simply put, the good treasurer must take note of this. Based on the equation of exchange, money supply times the velocity of money equals price levels times GDP. In short, Mr. Speaker, that means you increase the increase of the money supply is the cause of inflation. In 2018, the Temporary Advance Facility, the TAF, was 200 million kina, and in 2024, under the auspices of the good treasurer, it increased tenfold to 2 billion kina. Mr. Speaker, the printing of money or the use of quantitative easing as a tool for resourcing the budget is elusive and it promotes insidious inflationary effects by directly increasing prices through an increase of the money supply.
Make your money. Stop printing it.
Quantitative easing, Mr. Speaker, printing of money at the central bank is lazy economic management by the good treasurer. It's the easy way out. This will continue to erode the Bank of Papua New Guinea and its independence, Mr. Speaker, and its ability to effectively implement monetary policy and control inflation. In short, if we don't stop the encroachment between Treasury and the central bank, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to exacerbate the cost of living crisis experienced by our people. There needs to be a separation immediately.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, now I bring the Honourable House to the debt burden in 2024. Mr. Speaker, in 1975, when our founding father, the great Grand Chief Sir Michael Somare, took the country to independence, from 1975 to 2018, 43 years, Mr. Speaker, our national debt increased to 25 billion kina. That's an average of 1.72 billion kina per annum. All honourable members of the House, this should put things in perspective. In the 5 years that the Marape government took office under the Prime Ministership of the Honourable James Marape and his apt and hard-working treasurer, the Honourable Ian Lingstaki borrowed a total of 37 billion kina. Wow. That's roughly 7.4 billion kina per annum. Before the Marape government, honourable leaders, and through you, Mr. Speaker, the national debt was 25 billion kina in 2018. After the Marape government took office, 37 billion kina was borrowed, increasing the national debt to 62 billion kina. This is unprecedented and reflects an insatiable appetite for debt. In 2024, Mr. Speaker, our debt to GDP ratio was 50.5%. For every kina in revenue generated, 50.5% of that money goes towards debt repayment. In 2025, this will be reduced to 47.4%, and we take note of the Treasurer's good work in amending the Fiscal Responsibilities Act. The high debt to GDP ratio will make it difficult to invest in our people, education, health, and infrastructure. Being over-leveraged, Mr. Speaker, will reduce our liquidity and make us less competitive. Mr. Speaker, I take the House to capital investment budget. The fundamental reason, honourable leaders, through you, Mr. Speaker, for debt financing should be to invest in infrastructure that will create jobs for our people and be a catalyst for economic development. This is where the capital investment budget is so important, and this is where it comes in. Mr. Speaker, in 2024, there is little information on what was not spent from the 7.6 billion capital investment budget, when the actual expenditure was 4.7 billion. So the difference, Mr. Speaker, of 2.9 billion kina of outstanding funding in the capital investment budget remains unexplained by the good Treasurer. In 2025, the Marape government continues to promote this sinkhole program called Connect PNG with no audit, no oversight, and unreported arrears. This program, Mr. Speaker, is the biggest money grab in the history of Papua New Guinea. And a total of 2.6 billion is put into this budget in the capital investment budget for 2025, earmarked for this program. All honourable leaders, Mr. Speaker, have to ask the question, who is benefiting from the Connect PNG program? How many contractors from each of the provinces can claim to be a beneficiary of this program? Mr. Speaker, over many moons, we have heard the good Prime Minister spruik the Marape government's exceptional ability to grow GDP. In 2025, GDP is expected to grow by 4.9%, Mr. Speaker. Yet, we simply do not have any figures whatsoever on GDP per capita. Of all the gross domestic product numbers that are being touted by the Marape government, how is this improving the well-being, the quality of living, and the lives of our people in Papua New Guinea? There is absolutely no figures on GDP per capita. In 2024, real GDP grew by 4.7%, taking our total GDP, or the size of our economy, Mr. Speaker, to 122 billion in real numbers. Mr. Speaker, in 5 years, from 2019 to 2024, GDP has grown in real numbers from 82 billion kina to 122 billion, which is around 40 billion in GDP growth. The Marape government has done the following in 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable House must take critical note of this. In 5 years, the Marape government has borrowed 37 billion kina for purported capital investment projects. Yet, in those same 5 years, the GDP grew by only 40 billion. That's a productive difference of 3 billion kina in 5 years. This is not remarkable, Mr. Speaker, and it is nothing to brag about. In terms of aggregate demand, the total focus of the Marape government has been, in subsequent budgets and in this budget, on increasing borrowings to fuel government spending, with little consideration for consumption through better tax policy, net exports, or investments. We are not a business-friendly government, Mr. Speaker, and we have not been able to create any jobs through private sector investment. It's a big GDP budget, and it should be, Mr. Speaker, because of record commodity prices. Gold is again over 2,300 USD an ounce. Cocoa has tripled in price in 3 years, and on it goes. Rather than taking advantage, Mr. Speaker, of this high commodity prices and giving it back to our people, the increased revenues are being used to manage high interest repayments on the excessive debt that we have undertaken. Interest payments are up 15% from 2024 to 2025 and will now equate to 3.5 billion in the budget. Reflecting on yesteryears, Mr. Speaker, interest payments in 2018 were 1.9 billion and in 2019 were just 2.1 billion. But now they are over 3.5 billion kina. There is no new money for capital investment. In fact, it's gone backwards by 3% to 10.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, interest could really get out of control with inflation pressures on exchange rates, because our external debt, Mr. Speaker, is in USD, for instance, and therefore interest costs in kina might become unmanageable and eat into the budget because we have borrowed in foreign currency. In turn, this will force domestic borrowing costs to increase. In short, Mr. Speaker, we are chasing our tail for money to only spend it on more interest. Now, Mr. Speaker, the crux of the budget and the whole purpose of members of Parliament coming to Parliament to push bills and amendments is so they can effectively obtain the resources they need to develop their districts and provinces. This is public money, Mr. Speaker, and it requires the highest standards, and especially when it comes to telling the truth. Public monies belonging to the people of Papua New Guinea. A question of veracity, Mr. Speaker, will be raised in this next section, and I use the police as a case in point. Mr. Speaker, I remind this Honourable House that the 2025 budget is supposed to translate policy into beneficial outcomes for our people. It is a question of the government's intent and the veracity of its public pronouncements. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, in Papua New Guinea we are starting to see the proliferation of methamphetamines, cocaine, and other illicit drugs that are a scourge to society and harming our young men and women. So we're all aware, Mr. Speaker, that factory-produced drugs are becoming rampant throughout the country. Yet, Mr. Speaker, in 2024 budget, the National Narcotics Bureau received zero funding. So are we serious about methamphetamines and illicit drugs in our communities? when the National Narcotics Bureau received zero funding. Second example, Mr. Speaker, for the police force, the following appropriations were made from 2023 to 2025. In 2025, Mr. Speaker, in 2023, the police force received an appropriation of 515.8 million kina. That's $500 million kina, Mr. Speaker. In 2024, the same police force received 629.8 million kina. That's 0.6 billion, Mr. Speaker. And now in 2025, in line with the theme of securing PNG 2025 and beyond, they've just marginally increased the funding for police to 697.9 million, just under 700 million. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, police received 1.14 billion kina funding from 2023 to 2024. How has this money being spent, Mr. Speaker? Is the Marape government serious about law and order? Is the cartel and kakistocracy crippling the PNGYC and impeding their effectiveness as a disciplinary force, Mr. Speaker? This money, 1.14 billion kina, could have completely transformed the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary and made Papua New Guinea a safer place to live and work. 1.14 billion kina in police funding has vaporized, Mr. Speaker. So where is the money and how was it spent? Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister makes big statements about equitable distribution and funding to all members of Parliament, including opposition members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is a falsehood and a blatant lie, and this kind of disrespect to the people we represent must stop. The inequity and the deception in the 2024 budget implementation is captured below in 3 examples. 1, Mr. Speaker, the Karamui Special Economic Zone to receive 60% of funding from 150 million kina that was appropriated. Where has this money gone? Why has the Simbu provincial government not received money for the Karamui SEZ? What has happened to the 2 million investment that the Simbu provincial government made to expedite this program? 2, Mr. Speaker, the Chuave to Ungai road link. 15 million kina was allocated. Where has this money gone, and why has this road been given zero funding in 2025 and onwards, Mr. Speaker? Are the people of Chuave not coffee producers? Are the people of Chuave not important? Are the people of Chuave not part of Papua New Guinea, Mr. Speaker? 3rd, the Chuave Limestone Project, nil funding in 2024 and 2025 and onwards. 4, Mr. Speaker, Hiri Koyari PIP number 06236, project name Hiri Koyari Seat of Government. It received nil funding in 2024 and nil funding in 2025 because of the purported reason, and I quote, this is in the budget books, Mr. Speaker, there was no reports received to verify the use of funding. How can the people of Hiri Koyari report on funds they never received? Mr. Speaker, the elected representatives of Simbu Province, Chuave District and Hiri Koyari District are all in the opposition and have been deprived their funding. The lie that this is a fair government, that it has thick skin and can withstand criticism from the opposition when we hold them to account, must stop. On that point, Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent on all members of Parliament to ensure that there is fair and equitable distribution in national resource. Members in government, Mr. Speaker, cannot sit by the wayside and allow this sort of selective warranting to take place. Because just like you, we also represent people that matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we scrutinize the 2024 budget, we need to raise information on the liquidity crisis that's currently affecting Waigani right now. We confirmed by November 2024 that there is a chronic cash flow crisis that exists with 1.8 billion in unwarranted funds, 1 billion in warranted, and 800 million kina, Mr. Speaker, in floating checks. That's a total of 3.6 billion cash deficit. Where will the money come to offset the 3.6 billion that remains unpaid from the 2024 budget? Lack of budget discipline, Mr. Speaker, is leading to cost overruns of unbudgeted items that lead to arrears and low cash flow to meet budgeted items. This is the impact of entertaining parochial interests and practicing pork barrel politics, and demonstrates desperate spending by this government to placate government MPs, as was confirmed by the Honourable Windaki, and simply stay in power at the expense of the people of Papua New Guinea. Mr. Speaker, the good treasurer gloated about the tax breaks that were being introduced in the 2025 budget. Now, Mr. Speaker, the reforms to tax legislation are laudable, and given the existing tax law is convoluted and antiquated, members in the opposition support the Treasurer's announcement. We only ask that a more concerted effort is undertaken to expedite this so that the tax system can promote efficiency in tax collection, and we would encourage the Treasurer to stop playing the blame game and just do his job. Get on with it. The most significant tax relief feature in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, was the identification of 13 household items that will be zero-rated for GST purposes for a period of 12 months from 1st July 2025 through to 30th June 2026. These items are, Mr. Speaker, to remind all honourable leaders of the House, baby diapers, soap, biscuits, cooking oil, flour, chicken, noodles, rice, sanitary pads, tampons, tea, coffee, tin fish, and tinned meat. Mr. Speaker, the good treasurer has failed to consider how Papua New Guineans live throughout the country. The bulk of our women, Mr. Speaker, live in rural communities. When they come to a clinic or a health center or an aid post to birth, to give birth to a baby, Mr. Speaker, none of them are going to worry about diapers like the good treasurer mentioned. These diapers, Mr. Speaker, cost at least 100 kina imported from Australia, and the GST exemption on these diapers is of nil consequence to the millions of women throughout the country that use cotton diapers and do not use baby diapers as claimed by the Treasurer. This is a luxury item that many Papua New Guineans in rural communities, especially our women, cannot afford. Mr. Speaker, rather than go after GST, which is the bread and butter of our tax revenue, the Honourable Treasurer should have looked at imposing an exemption on tariffs for these goods that are being imported. Based on the effects of inflation that I already alluded to in the previous section, you can remove GST from these goods, but where does it stop? Removing GST from these goods, Mr. Speaker, is a lazy tax policy. It's a lazy tax policy. GST remains the bread and butter of the tax revenue, and we should not encroach or try to play around with GST. A real cost reduction would be in the tariffs, Mr. Speaker. We will still have the crawl-peg depreciation strategy that will increase the price of imports. The cost of manufacturing in Papua New Guinea, Mr. Speaker, is still high because we deal in repackaged goods. You're going to remove GST from tinned fish and tinned meat. Where will the tin come from for the tinned fish and the tinned meat? The cost of transportation and the import tariffs will negate, Mr. Speaker, any 10% GST exemption on these essential goods, commonly purchased by many households throughout Papua New Guinea. So this GST exemption, Mr. Speaker, will have nil effect. This is a knee-jerk reaction to spruik half-baked interventions for the cost of living crisis in PNG and simply show that this treasurer has not been doing his job. Mr. Speaker, I bring all honourable members to this critical point for contemplation. Selective warranting and the budget repair fallacy by the good treasurer. The 2025 budget will be affected once again, Mr. Speaker, by this nefarious tool called selective warranting. This is where the Treasurer and the good Prime Minister pick and choose who gets what, when they get it, and how much. The most important timeline for all members of Parliament to understand and debunk the budget repair fallacy is shown in Figure 1 below. In 2019, Mr. Speaker, the Public Finance Management Act was amended. Section 31 was amended, granting the Treasurer warranting powers. From Table 1, Mr. Speaker, we can see that the national debt doubled from 25 billion in 2018 to 53 billion in 2022. Then we can see on this timeline in Figure 1 in 2022 that the Treasurer, in his wisdom, introduced the 13-year budget repair strategy after he had already doubled national debt. Well done, Mr. Treasurer. By 2024, in 5 years, the Marape government has incurred 37 billion in debt and increased our national debt to over 62 billion kina, as per the timeline in Figure 1. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the Marape government must take ownership under the auspices of their hard-working treasurer for the unprecedented level of debt burden affecting Papua New Guineans. The artificial budget repair strategy as a solution to overcome some fictitious economic rut created by the other guy when the Prime Minister James Marape and the Treasurer, the Honourable Ian Lingstaki, have demonstrated an insatiable appetite for borrowing and reckless spending, Mr. Speaker. We must stop playing the blame game and take ownership for fiscal policy and the country's economic management after being in office for over 5 years. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the 2025 budget is a 28 billion kina budget. It's just under 1 billion kina larger than the 2024 budget, and this increase is chewed up by $500 million in extra loan interest payments and an increase in wages to public servants of 767 million kina. This is a budget with another big spend, but not on the people, but on interest bills, Mr. Speaker, and the big taxing with a reduction in capital investment. On a time of record commodity prices, all PNG has to show for it is a record debt of over 60 billion kina, Mr. Speaker. The quality improvements in new schools, health clinics, hospitals, classrooms, equipment, and infrastructure such as power are missing or going backwards. The government has demonstrated very poor quality in spending, and this will result in a protracted high cost of living crisis, low household incomes, and continued socio-economic regression. We will continue to have problems in health, in education, and in law and order. In 5 years, Mr. Speaker, we have borrowed 37 billion kina. The summary of expenditure could look like this, to put things in perspective for all honourable members of the House. 37 billion kina, 22 billion kina provincial block grants, 1 billion per province, 2 billion kina to health, education and police and defence and agriculture, 5 billion kina on everything else. If this is what had happened to the 37 billion kina of borrowed funds, Papua New Guinea would be a burgeoning economy, Mr. Speaker, with high employment and prosperity for our people. But sadly, this didn't happen. And this trend continued. Once again, Mr. Speaker, history is our #1 teacher. I judge the Treasurer and the Marape government on 2024 budget performance and take note that opposition members of Parliament have been deprived their appropriations, notwithstanding the fact that they represent people who make up the country called Papua New Guinea. I cannot support weaponization of budgets because of petty politics and the need to maintain power at all costs. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Chuave, I thank the Treasurer and the Marape government for removing projects for the Chuave people from the PIP investment program and for attempting to victimize me and them as the political representative of the people of Chuave. Take note, Mr. Speaker, this only galvanizes my resolve to call this government out for the total economic mismanagement of the country, with the most incompetent treasurer in our history and the worst Prime Minister in our history, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.